Boris, as people once said. Plus, Rishi's riches. With a joint household income of £730 million, the Sunaks have made the Sunday Times rich list. But is it fair to say this means the Chancellor doesn't get the cost of living crisis? And the monkeypox outbreak, what is it and how worried should we be? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. But what do you need to talk about? You can, as always, email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet the programme @GBNews. First, though, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 3 minutes past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister insists he won't block names in Sue Gray's report into Downing Street lockdown parties. Boris Johnson says he's looking forward to seeing the contents, in which senior figures involved are expected to be named. He's vowed to shake up Number 10 over the COVID-breaching gatherings. It's understood those impacted will be contacted and given a chance to respond before publication. Brexit Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg doesn't think these are resigning matters and that people make mistakes.
The rules were as they were, but looking back at it, and I think this is a very important part for the inquiry to play, we need to think whether those laws that stop people comforting the dying were ever right. And I hope the inquiry will look at that in case we ever have another pandemic. How proportionate were the rules and how far should the state go in controlling what people do?
The Prime Minister says he understands the importance of tackling obesity in the UK, particularly the pressure it puts on the NHS. Celebrity chef Jamie Oliver's leading a protest at Downing Street over the delay in new junk food laws. An overhaul to buy one, get one free promotions in supermarkets was due to go ahead this year, but has been pushed back to October 2023. Tesco and Sainsbury's, though, say they're committed to the original government deadlines. But Boris Johnson says consumers need offers in these tough times.
There are some things at the moment where we think they make very little difference to obesity, and they can affect people's weekly outgoings, people's budgets. And at this particular time, if people can save on their food bills with some offers, then I think we've just got to be flexible whilst continuing to tackle obesity.
Those are Boris Johnson's thoughts. Jamie Oliver, though, says he wants the high streets to be safer and that it's time for change.
It's not like a cute campaign. It ain't jazz hands. This is fundamental. It's as profound as the smoking ban. It saves lives. It's about making young people do better, live longer, and be more productive.
Ukraine's Azov regiment says they've been issued a military command to stop defending the city of Mariupol. The volunteer brigade, affiliated with the far right, says civilians and heavily wounded defenders have been evacuated from the city's Azovstal steel plant and that dead bodies are still being removed. Moscow reports almost 2,000 Ukrainian fighters have now surrendered. Some of them have arrived in a Russian-controlled town near Donetsk. Meanwhile, President Volodymyr Zelensky says the Donbass region's been completely destroyed by Russian forces.
The armed forces of Ukraine continue advancing to liberate the Kharkiv region. But in Donbass, the occupiers are trying to exert even more pressure. It is a hell there, and it is not an exaggeration. The brutal and absolutely senseless bombardment of Severodonetsk. There were 12 killed and dozens wounded in just one day.
11 new cases of monkeypox have been confirmed in the UK, taking the total here to 20. The Health Secretary said he's updated G7 health ministers on what's known about the spread of the virus. Sajid Javid says most cases are mild and that the UK has secured vaccines effective against the disease. Monkeypox is usually found in West Africa, which is why outbreaks across the rest of the world have caused alarm. The Chancellor and his wife have made the Sunday Times rich list for the first time as Russian billionaires tumble down the rankings. Rishi Sunak and Akshata Murthy have been ranked at 222 on the list with their joint £730 million fortune. The couple's finances have come under scrutiny in recent months. It was estimated Ms Murthy's non-dom status could have saved her £20 million in taxes. And 8 new cities have been created as part of the celebrations for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee taking place in 2 weeks' time. The Cabinet Office announced the capital of the Falkland Islands, Stanley, is one of them, alongside Douglas on the Isle of Man, Bangor in Northern Ireland, Dunfermline in Scotland, Wrexham in Wales, Colchester, Doncaster and Milton Keynes in England. Brexit Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg says the new city status has been awarded on merit and not on size. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Alex, and we need to talk about.
Well, the Tories have all gone to Wales. Well, most of them. Anyway, as it's the Conservative annual conference there, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been addressing the party faithful in Newtown in Powys. Meanwhile, back in London, Sue Gray has a weekend of work ahead of her to cross the T's and dot the I's on the much-anticipated report into Partygate that at one stage seemed set to topple the man at the top. Well, let's have a chat with our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, about it all. Tom, where do we begin? I suppose with Boris Johnson's speech at the Welsh Conservative conference. What were the highlights?
Well, he looked like a visibly more relaxed Prime Minister than we have seen in previous weeks. Of course, clearly feeling relatively relieved about the news of no further fines, about that sense of tension around his leadership ebbing away in Westminster. He's a more secure man than he has been for quite some time in his job. And it's interesting looking at the themes of his speech more than just his demeanour. Of course, he's speaking in Wales, where the Conservatives have just lost quite a few councillors in the local elections. But he did point to his new Director of Communications, Guto Harry, being a fluent Welsh speaker. Now, that's something that he made a quip about there being more powerful Welsh people in Downing Street than at any time since the Tudors, which I'm not sure Lloyd George would have much shrift with. But clearly there was more substance to the speech as well. He mentioned inflation, and that is clearly a very, very big challenge and one that the government is keen to get ahead of. He was talking about the global drivers of inflation, how it's not just the UK that is suffering now, but America and Europe as well. And he spoke about the mines in the Black Sea, stopping grain exports from Ukraine, speaking about how the world will need to source other areas to get food from, and that will take time, speaking as if this inflation is a temporary crisis we need to get through. And he used the words that we got so used to hearing during COVID about putting the government's arms around the people of Britain. Now, whether or not that the government will live up to the really high expectation that image evokes, sort of a new furlough perhaps. I don't think anyone's suggesting that government spending will get to that level, but clearly the government wanting to get ahead of this inflation story. And crucially talking about how it was that the country made it through COVID in the first place, speaking about how the Labour Party wanted to not open up as quickly, some Labour figures suggesting we should have shut down last Christmas when the government kept things open, saying that's what allowed the economy to be strong enough to survive in the way that it did, although I'm sure that many people would be thinking, is the economy really that strong? Lowest growth in the G7 expected next year, although, as the Chancellor likes to point out, it's expected to get faster after next year, getting up to the second highest in 2 years' time, albeit the lowest next year. There's a really mixed picture on the economy, and we'll see politicians from different parties cherry-picking their data in the way that they do. There's really good news on employment, there's good news in the long term on growth, but bad news in the short term on growth and bad news clearly on inflation as well. The Prime Minister pointing to the vaccine success, as he so often does, with millions of vials of vaccines bottled in Wales. That got a good cheer from the audience there, saying that that's what allowed us to come out of COVID in the way that we did, faster and sooner than just about any other country. So yes, a mixed speech, one that pointed to and acknowledged the real problems that people will be going through in the short term as a result of this global inflation crisis, but also pointing to some of the successes, as he sees it, that the government has had in recent years.
Yeah, it seems to me not a very Welsh-centric speech, which perhaps seems unusual as he's addressing the Welsh Conservative conference. But one assumes that he's taking the opportunity on this Friday, as the Met Police finish up their investigation and say they've done and dusted that he is using that platform to send out big big national messages, perhaps to distract from the conversation that would otherwise be taking place, which, of course, is the upcoming Sue Gray report. Now, before, people were saying that it could mean curtains for the Prime Minister, and the snippets we had previewed with all the redactions did seem quite excoriating. What do you anticipate? Is it coming out early next week?
We are expecting it to come out early next week. Now, there's only one person in the country who knows exactly when it's coming out, and that is Sue Gray. She'll be crossing the T's and dotting the I's over this weekend. She's also going to be speaking to some of the key people involved and named in the report, as is due process, really, to make sure that they know what's coming, and then it will be published early next week as soon as it can be. We're expecting perhaps some pictures to be published as well, which will be very interesting, I'm sure, for many people to pour over. But also, I think there's been such a high expectation across the whole of this scandal from the moment it started at the end of last year right through up to now, more than half a year of talking about parties and swings being broken and suitcases of wine and DJs in the basement and all the rest of it. I think to some extent, because those expectations are so high, elements involving the Prime Minister or indeed the top civil servant Simon Case may be less than people expect, just because I suppose many people in the country have an image of Boris Johnson, you know, swigging alcohol from the bottle, dancing up and down, you know, just behaving in a sort of raving manner. When in reality, we know that's not what these events were like. The event for which he was fined was 8 minutes of singing Happy Birthday and standing awkwardly around the cabinet table before a meeting. I mean, this was the kind of event that we're talking about, although one of the very interesting events that will be very, very crucial to read in Sue Gray's report is the alleged ABBA party, for which the Prime Minister's wife nor the Prime Minister were fined, but which has received a lot of airing in the press, allegedly a karaoke evening in the flat of number 10 with ABBA music playing. Now, did that take place? Has it been exaggerated in the press? What did everyone who was allegedly there that evening say to Sue Gray and indeed the police to make sure that there wasn't a fine for that event? There'll be elements like that that are very interesting, but ultimately I think the worst is over for the Prime Minister in this sense. And speaking today was his first big opportunity to sort of come back on the stage, have a long talk with not just the party in Wales, but also the people of Britain, and set out his stall for the years to come.
Tom, fantastic analysis as always. Thank you ever so much. Well, let's talk now to former Labour Party advisor Scarlett Maguire. So, Scarlett, Tom there saying he thinks the worst is possibly over for Boris, and, well, time, they say, is a great healer. And it seems to be so much else going on that Partygate has dropped off from the headlines. But do you think, when it raises its ugly head next week, that it could yet again pose a big problem for the Prime Minister?
It looks as though that the Conservative MPs will not be going for his head, right? I think that's quite important, and that's a big change. What hasn't changed is the way the country's looked at it. Is that while in Westminster there might have been talk about, you know, mad parties, actually outside Westminster, what really angered people was that there's a culture of parties, possibly not massive ones, but we are talking about suitcases of alcohol being wheeled in. 12 parties were looked at on 8 days. That's quite a lot when none of the rest of us were allowed to have any gatherings at all. And I think that you can tell from the polls, you can tell from the local election results, people are really, really not happy, and they're not going to be forgiving about it at all. We know that Allegra Stratton, we've all seen the film of it. Allegra Stratton was giggling about a party that happened, and the Prime Minister still said the guidelines have not been broken. There were no parties, there were no breaking of rules. So actually, it's not washing.
We do find ourselves in quite an interesting and ironic position, don't we, where you'd expect the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, to really come out shooting Boris on this one. But he, of course, himself is now under investigation by the Met Police and has said that he would resign if he receives a fine. So where does that leave him? Do you expect him to be able to come out swinging, or is this going to subdue what could otherwise be quite a sort of visceral response from the Labour benches?
I mean, I think you have to look at the difference between the two men. One says that if he gets a fine, he'll go, and the other has got a fine and has no intention of going. But what's important is not who gets the fines. It's actually, did Boris Johnson lie to Parliament when he said no rules were broken, we stuck to the guidelines? No, and if he didn't know, it meant he hadn't asked, right? There was no question that there was rule breaking on an industrial way in number 10. 126 fines were given out. There was rule breaking. He told Parliament there wasn't. That's lying.
Scarlett Maguire, fantastic to have your position on this as well. Perhaps from a Labour point of view, dare I say, Scarlett Maguire, who is a good friend of this show. Joining me as my studio guest today is Conservative political commentator Calvin Robinson. Now, Calvin, I mean, we can discuss until the cows come home the rights and the wrongs of Partygate, whether the public have bothered or not. What matters at the end of the day is MPs licking their fingers, putting it up to the direction of the wind and deciding whether they want to topple the Prime Minister. And I get the impression right now they're a venal bunch, are they? But there's probably not much of an appetite for it.
No, not at the moment. And I think they've got to ask the question of what would they have done if they'd been caught too. They've got to address their own consciences. I don't think there's much nobility left in the Houses of Parliament. I don't think there are many people that would fall on their swords. But if they are standing up and saying, Prime Minister, you have to go, they have to question, would they have stood down if they got fined? And
the big question is, who would replace him? Who would want to in the current climate?
Well, who would you want to? I don't even know at this point. There are very few high-calibre members of Parliament. We have the politicians that we deserve. It's a common saying, isn't it? I'd love to see some people step up that have principles, that wouldn't actually lock people away in their homes, wouldn't take away our civil liberties and then get fined off the back of not following their own rules. I'd love for some strong people to stand up and say, actually, we'll make a difference.
Have you found your own sort of position on Partygate change over the course of time? Because I know I have. When it first emerged, I was enraged by it, especially the thought of that little wheelie suitcase. I don't know why, that's stuck in my craw. Whereas now, I'm bored by it. I really find myself not exercised at all anymore.
I tend to think it's a bit of a distraction. I think the left have been on the Prime Minister's case from the beginning. The mainstream media have been hammering the Prime Minister, trying to essentially topple a sitting Prime Minister. And I think, what are we not talking about? What's going on in the wider picture that they want to focus on? This is a dead cat on this Partygate situation that the general public have kind of lost interest in weeks ago.
Well, it's now descended into farce, isn't it? When the Labour leader was saying, you should resign if you're found to have broken the law. And now he's been investigated by the Met Police. I mean, you know, there's no avenue out of this for anybody. It's just descended into a nonsense.
And then you have to question, was this hypocrisy, or was this just... Did Keir Starmer not realise that he'd been at a curry and beer party? Like, why was he pointing the finger so strongly at the Prime Minister when he knew all along he was guilty of the same crime?
Do you think if Keir Starmer is fined that he is going to... I suppose he's got to stick to his word, hasn't he, having said it? And then we end up in a situation where, despite the 126 fines in 10 Downing Street, that one moment in Durham could actually see the man who should be profiting from this, the one losing his position.
It is a bit strange that he said beforehand that he will step down if he is found guilty. Almost feels like he's putting pressure on the police investigation to not find him guilty. He shouldn't have said anything. He should have waited for the results and then done the right thing, which is indeed stepping down.
Yeah, I mean, the stakes are indeed very high. Calvin Robinson, thank you ever so much. I want to know your views on this. We've been speaking about it a lot, haven't we, over the course of however many months? It seems like years this has been going on now. But are you a bit like me? Do you not care anymore? I mean, you know, what's done is done. Time's a wonderful healer, and let's just crack on with running the country. Or do you think if that Sue Gray report is as excoriating as we think it might be, that, well, the tide could yet turn and the Prime Minister should go? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet the programme @GBNews. You are with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, do Rishi's riches make him out of touch with the financial pain of the population? Or perhaps is the inclusion of the Chancellor in the Sunday Times rich list a politicised move to make us think he is? It's time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast. I'm back in a bit.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather updates. Mixed picture today. Showers for most areas, some of them heavy, but between the showers every now and then things brightening up a little bit, but a cooler feel for sure. Large area of low pressure dominating up to the northwest. This weather front will be a focus for some of the showers. We've seen some pretty wet weather already this morning over eastern and southern parts of England. That is moving away, taking until the early afternoon before it clears completely from the east. Then dry for a time before the showers get going. And most areas seeing those showers, particularly across Northern Ireland and western parts of Scotland, where it all will be pretty wet. Some heavy showers possible, even the odd rumble of thunder can't be ruled out. But between the downpours, it will brighten up at times, but it doesn't feel very warm out there. Temperatures only in the high teens at best. Cooler than yesterday. Quite a few showers around for the early evening, especially over eastern England and eastern Scotland, but they do fade away. So for many, it'll become dry through the evening. A few showers keeping going across the northwest overnight, but otherwise most places dry after midnight. Temperatures down to 8 to maybe 10 Celsius, perhaps a little lower in the countryside. On to Saturday, and actually for most tomorrow's a dry and a bright day. There will be some showers over northern Scotland, and we'll see more showers through the day developing in western Scotland. 1 or 2 for Northern Ireland, maybe the odd one for Wales and the Midlands, but I think for a good part of England and Wales, most places will just have a dry day with some sunny spells in the east. Temperatures a little higher, up to maybe 20 Celsius. Generally elsewhere, though, we are still only in the mid-teens, and with a fair few more showers to come in during Saturday evening across parts of Scotland. A bit more coming into Northern Ireland too as you go through the night. And we'll keep a lot of cloud, I suspect, moving back in during Saturday night and into Sunday. Some showers around on Sunday, again mostly in the north and the west, with the southeast probably staying dry and feeling a bit warmer by then too.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's 2 questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello. In the middle of an energy crisis, it seems a bit mad to be closing power stations. You only have to look at Germany's disastrous policy of shutting all their nuclear sites and having to buy Putin power instead to realise following suit and decommissioning 7 of ours, especially when the price of doing so will now cost the taxpayer over 23 billion quid, is surely bonkers. I don't really understand it, but the Public Accounts Committee says the sites should have closed down years ago and have been replaced with new options, and are now warning that the delays to getting this done will have a significant impact on our energy production. Not exactly the news we need right now, even if Boris has promised 8 new plants in 8 years. Something to me that sounds pretty fantastical. Well, here to explain it all to me is Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, Deputy Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, who have published a report on the cost of decommissioning the power stations. Sir Geoffrey, fantastic to have you on. I was reading about this all morning and I can't quite wrap my head around it. So what's going on here? These are old nuclear power stations that should be offline by now, but are still ticking over, and we've got to get rid of them.
Well, good afternoon. It's great to be with you. And this is a very complicated subject, so I'm not surprised you've been trying to get your head around it. Indeed, it took us quite a lot of time in the public accounts to do just that. But let me try and explain what's going on. So we've already had the first lot of nuclear power stations has already gone offline, and most of them have been defueled. That's the Magnox power stations. The next generation of power stations were these advanced gas-cooled reactors, and they will come to the end of their life by 2028. Now, we have asked in the Public Accounts Committee, in view of the energy crisis that you were referring to, whether there is a technically safe way to enhance their life. But I think we were told relatively clearly that that is unlikely. Therefore, they do have to be commissioned by 2028. And by then, unfortunately, we will only have Hinkley C and the one pressurized water reactor at Sizewell B left. So we will have a dip in the amount of nuclear power that is being generated. At the moment, or in 2021, about 16% of all our power was being generated by nuclear power stations. And that's really important because it can generate 24 hours a day. It provides what's called base load to the electricity grid, whereas photovoltaics or windmills, of course, only work when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing.
Seems to me the clock is ticking down quite rapidly to a sort of energy apocalypse. We're already in an energy crisis, and if that continues and the price of gas and oil doesn't dip anytime soon, then it sounds to me as if we're paying £23 billion to make that even worse.
Well, of course, we all knew when we went into building these nuclear power stations that there was going to be a big bill for decommissioning them. Now, one of our key recommendations, particularly in relation to the new Hinkley C and these new 8 mini nuclear power stations you were referring to, is there needs to be a mechanism so that when the power generators are getting increased amounts for their electricity, we're able to adjust the amounts that they're paying for the decommissioning. And that isn't present here, and it should have been. And that is why, one of the reasons why the cost is so much.
Has proposed 8 new power stations in 8 years. You say they're sort of small-sized ones. Even to me, even to a layman, that government projects don't have much of a habit of running on time, and that seems like a pretty ambitious target. Normally, don't nuclear power stations take a good decade to build?
Well, that is true of the big ones, like Hinkley C, which is a massive one. We're talking about mini ones. Rolls-Royce and others are beginning to plan already how they're going to do this. And this is really good news because it will use British companies with British labour rather than having to go to the French and the Chinese. So actually, I'm all in favour of these little mini power stations. And I think we need to think about, as you say, bringing them online as quickly as we can and probably building more of them if we could. And that is one of the advantages of decommissioning these sites. As you can see from your pictures on the screen now, they are enormous. And there is plenty of land there that's brownfield land that will accommodate these little mini nuclear power stations.
Small modular reactors, aren't they? I agree with you totally, Geoffrey. I think they're brilliant. And also able to be popped up overseas, a wonderful exportable commodity. And like you said, Rolls-Royce, great British brand. Thank you so much for coming on and explaining that to me, because it is a bit of a mind jumble, isn't it?
Just add one other thing, is that we should, I think, and I think the Public Accounts Committee in their report makes this clear, we should be providing a fund of money now that can grow so that when it comes to meeting the costs, as you say, £23 billion of decommissioning these stations, there is a fund there. At the moment, there's only a very small actual amount of money in the fund. All the rest is being funded by government through the National Loans Board. It's not any real money. It's simply an accounting adjustment. And I think we need to look very carefully at how we actually provide for decommissioning of these stations.
Yeah, indeed. Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, MP for the Cotswolds, wonderful part of the world, that Deputy Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. You're with GB News on TV and DAB Radio. Coming up, we'll get a microbiologist's take on the monkeypox outbreak. What is it and how worried should we be? Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister insists he won't block names in Sue Gray's report into Downing Street lockdown parties. Boris Johnson says he's looking forward to seeing the contents, in which senior figures involved are expected to be named. Celebrity chef Jamie Oliver's leading a protest at Downing Street over a delay in new junk food laws. An overhaul to buy one, get one free promotions in supermarkets was due to go ahead this year, but has been pushed back to October 2023. The Prime Minister justified the delay, saying consumers need to be supported through the cost of living crisis.
There are some things at the moment where we think they make very little difference to obesity, and they can affect people's weekly outgoings, people's budgets. And at this particular time, if people can save on their food bills with some offers, then I think we've just got to be flexible whilst continuing to tackle obesity.
Ukraine's Azov regiment says they've been issued a military command to stop defending the city of Mariupol. The volunteer brigade, affiliated with the far right, says civilians and heavily wounded defenders have been evacuated from the city's Azovstal steel plant and that dead bodies are still being removed. 11 new cases of monkeypox have been confirmed in the UK, taking the total here to 20. The Health Secretary says he's updated G7 health ministers on what's known about the spread of the virus. Sajid Javid says most cases are mild and that the UK has secured vaccines effective against the disease. And 8 new cities have been created as part of the celebrations for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, with at least one named in every UK nation. The capital of the Falkland Islands, Stanley, is one of them. Douglas in the Isle of Man has also claimed the civic honour. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. It's back to Alex with We Need to Talk About in just a moment.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's 2 questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, having all been dragged through the mire of a pandemic, nobody wants to be told there's a new gruesome disease spreading across the world. But it's increasingly hard to ignore the headlines and those nauseating images. There they are, of pus-filled blisters doing the rounds at the moment concerning monkeypox. It even has a name that sounds suitably gross. Cases rarely appear outside Africa, but incidents have been detected in Europe, the UK, Canada and America, suggesting the pestilence has significantly spread and undetected. What's going on, and should we be worried? Well, the government has just bought a quantity of the smallpox vaccine, which can offer protection to those likely to get infected, with Spain following suit. Are we just being alarmist, and is this just newspaper clickbait? Well, it's probably time we find out. Let's talk to Professor Andrew Preston, a microbiologist at the University of Bath. We meet again. We thought we were over all the pandemics and the public health scares, but here we have monkeypox. What's going on?
Well, it looks like we've imported a couple of cases from the areas where it's endemic, so Africa, and we now have clear community spread, perhaps limited, but as you say, it's been headline grabbing. Monkeypox sounds exotic, it sounds dangerous. It's certainly not pleasant, but nothing to be too alarmed about at the moment.
I slightly suspect that this is newspapers knowing that a story like this will certainly generate clicks, especially following a pandemic, when actually, the number of cases does seem to be pretty minimal and pretty localised, and the spread isn't respiratory, is it? It's not like COVID, which, sneezing, coughing, breathing, whatever can pass it on. It's sort of a bit more intimate than that.
It can be spread via respiratory route, but it is far less infectious. You're quite right, and you need close contact with another infected person, so it's on a different scale altogether from what we've just been through. But of course, it sounds exotic, and certainly it's unusual to see monkeypox outside of its sort of normal grounds. In Africa, it happens in some countries. They have seen it before, but it's rare. And of course, I think we're still all highly sensitized to anything that could be described as an outbreak or the spread of disease. So I think those two things combined gives rise to the headlines and the interest that's been displayed over the last few days.
Sort of grisly little infections like this come over from tropical countries. Certainly I know I came back from Ghana with a bit of malaria, as most people do. But, how often do these things happen? Is it just making headlines because there is this sort of alarmist fascination now with things that might be spreading socially after the pandemic?
Yeah, as you say, I think we're sensitized to infectious disease news and possibly concern. It is unusual to see this sort of spread within the communities. In terms of the original cases, there was clear evidence of recent travel to Nigeria where it was likely acquired. But since then, we've seen a doubling of cases of people that there's no obvious link between them, and clearly they have not been to those areas. So it is spreading between some people here in the UK. So of course that's unusual, and after what we've been through, it is causing some concern. But UK HSA are following up the contacts very, very closely, and it should be far, far easier to contain than obviously COVID or other respiratory spread diseases.
Now, my understanding is there are two types of monkeypox, a Congolese one, which is pretty grim, and a West African one, which I understand this one either is related to or is, which is far less grim. What are the symptoms? If people are worried, I'm not saying they should be, but what should they be looking out for?
Well, unfortunately, so many infectious diseases all start with the same kind of symptoms. So chills, fever, headache, which is the body's sort of overriding response to most infectious diseases. But then, a few days after that, you get the rash appears on the face and the arms and can spread. And that'll be it for most cases, to be honest, those cases that remain mild. But people obviously, are going to now be concerned the moment they see any of those symptoms. And I know there's certainly quite a nasty cold doing the rounds now post-COVID. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's a lot of people in those areas where cases have been recorded when they wake up or start to feel a little bit fluey, a little bit headachy, will be thinking, well, is this the cold that's going around, or have I somehow come into contact with somebody with monkeypox? So it's going to cause some unrest, some concern to people, but a vast majority of those cases will, of course, just turn out to be this nuisance cold that's doing the rounds.
Thank you ever so much. It sounds to me like we're not about to be locked up in our homes again. Thank goodness. Professor Andrew Peston, who's microbiologist at the University of Bath. But let's go back to my studio guest, Conservative political commentator Calvin Robinson. Monkeypox, what next?
Oh, I'm cautious about this one.
Me too.
Global leaders met last year to plan for a response to a monkeypox pandemic.
Did they?
Yep.
Did they really?
They did. Bill Gates has been talking about the next pandemic being monkeypox or smallpox. I understand there are very small differences between smallpox, monkeypox and chickenpox in the reactions that people get. So would you be able to tell the difference between
You're not pulling my chain on that, are you?
Not at all.
You're not a Bill Gates microchip.
No, I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all, but I'm seeing these things, these conversations being had over the last year or two, and now all of a sudden we have cases of monkeypox popping up. And the numbers, of course, are very small. More people die from inanimate objects every year in this country than from something like monkeypox, even with the current case numbers. So I don't think there's anything to be concerned about. But the media response to it and the government response to it are things to be concerned about.
In what sense are they things to be concerned about? Because surely there are a few cases that have been detected. We have to trust that that is absolutely true. It does seem to be spreading in some way, shape or form, because people don't have a context of knowing each other always. People have contracted it. And the government's saying, well, look, it isn't that problematic. But if you have been in touch with someone with it, there's a vaccine that already exists, thanks
that's convenient, isn't it?
Edward Jenner.
Oh, who's going to be making money from that vaccine, I'd like to know. What I don't want to see is any more lockdowns. I don't want to see any more civil liberties taken away for something like this, especially if it's just a rash. I don't want to see more Project Fear from the government or the mainstream media scaring people to death over something that isn't that serious. And I don't want to see these vaccines being pushed down our throats if they're not necessary. So if people are vulnerable and need a vaccine, absolutely great, but don't shove it down the general populace to make money.
Calvin, thank you very much. Strident stuff there. some enlightening things you just told me. Well, let's get some of your views now. Not on monkeypox, you haven't had time to send those in yet, but on Partygate. David says, Starmer says Boris should resign for being investigated. Well, Starmer is being investigated himself. What a hypocrite. Stuart says, the British people want to move on now, but as usual, the Labour lot can't. Even when their own leader is guilty of the same, they still can't stop going on about it. They are just a bunch of pathetic Marxist traitors and completely unelectable. Strong stuff. Peter says, I think this whole Partygate thing was confected by the left to get rid of Boris. Starmer can't be that clever when he knew he did worse. Is that worse, though? The pint in Durham, is that worse than the wheelie suitcase with all the bottles of Prosecco in it? Pat says, both should go. Equally culpable, both found guilty by evidence. Gavin says, for God's sakes, give it a rest. The media can't stop spouting about it. Oh, yeah, well, you listened, though, didn't you? Keep your thoughts coming in throughout the programme. Now, much has been made of Chancellor Rishi Sunak and his wife making the Sunday Times rich list, becoming the first frontline politician to do so. But you know what? I can't help but wonder whether his inclusion via the family fortune of his missus is actually political. What better way to demonise the Chancellor during a cost of living crisis? The headlines speak for themselves. The sneers that somehow Sunak is out of touch. But do we risk becoming an intolerant, inversely snobbery-obsessed society, judgmental and jealous of success? Surely rate the man by his record in office. Don't make a class issue out of the son of immigrants who waited tables at a curry house and happened to be so precociously bright he got into a top school, went to a top university, got a top degree, then a top scholarship at a top American university before he met his top wife, before getting a top job at a top investment bank. Arguably, our greatest Prime Minister of all time, Churchill, was born into the lap of luxury in Blenheim Palace. If we become a country that berates people for the money in their pocket, surely we will be much worse off for it. Well, let's get the views of my studio guest, Calvin Robinson, on that one. So we've had the whole, raised eyebrow over monkeypox. Do you have a raised eyebrow over the Sunday Times rich list?
No, I think people achieving success is something to be celebrated. That's good old-fashioned Thatcherite aspiration, wanting people to do better for themselves and better for the next generation. That's a good thing. If we want to criticise Sunak, I think you're right. We should criticise him for being a socialist. For we lived under years of Tory austerity, which I believe was the right thing to do, to live within our means. And after that, he's come and just found the magic money tree that the Conservatives campaigned against and spent our way out of a pandemic. All the while, not putting measures in place to prevent fraud. And we've got billions and billions of pounds that have gone missing. I think for him overspending and for him allowing people to rinse the system, and of course, for other things such as mates rates and different people achieving tender for PPE masks and things like that within outside of the government. All of these things are things to criticise Rishi Sunak for. But his wife being rich is not one of them.
Do you think this cuts through with the population, though? Because that's clearly what some of the newspaper headlines intend it to do. But do you think we are a society that looks at someone like Rishi Sunak and says, well, just because you're a multi-millionaire, you don't get it?
Yeah, I think we've lost that sense of aspiration. I think America has it. They look at someone and they think, how can we help them be a success? In the UK, we're like an underdog. We love an underdog. But the moment someone achieves success, we're waiting for them to fail. We're counting down for them to fall from grace.
Now, there have been people who have intimated to me that perhaps Rishi Sunak would have been wanting to do more, that he's not necessarily been in lockstep with policies coming from Number 10, and the fact that his own party may have shot him in the face a little bit is preventing him from doing so, that perhaps he got a little bit too popular during the pandemic.
There is some of that, but I think he's also spent more money than we've spent in a long, long time, and you cannot escape the fact that our grandkids, our great-grandkids will still be paying it back, if anything. That is not a Conservative policy.
Now, this Sunday Times Rich List is the latest tool to bash him round the head, following, of course, the green card furore and the non-dom status of his wife, where she supposedly saved about 20 million in taxes. She has, of course, now said she will be paying taxes in the UK on those foreign earnings, something which she didn't have to do, actually. Do you think it was fair to drag those things up and throw them at Sunak? Or do you think this is just an example of, trying to get political and play the man, not the ball?
A bit of both. I do think there should be transparency. If you're in high office, and there's not much higher office than the Chancellor of the Exchequer, you should be clear on your status as a citizen in this country and other countries, and your wife's, because you're in this together. It's a partnership. I don't think we should have politicians in high office that are not purely British subjects. I don't think you should have a passport to another country. Your loyalties should remain here.
Yeah, so green card was an for you. The non-dom status thing is more about just not really fessing up sooner.
And especially if you are the Chancellor, you're asking other people to pay more taxes out of the hard-earned money that they've made. You should make sure that your family are paying their fair share too. I think we should all be paying less tax, but if he's encouraging us to pay more, he should make sure his family are paying it.
So dodgy as opposed to politically naive?
Yeah, or a bit of both, maybe.
Oh, not a Sunak fan, I take it.
Not at all.
Calvin, thank you ever so much. Of course, you can let me know what you think about all of these things. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or, of course, tweet the programme @GBNews, and have a good old squabble on Twitter while you're at it. Well, now, a shout-out to my home city today. Woohoo! The marvellous Gloucester, which has been a bit of a big deal since Roman times. It was the capital of Britannia Seconda. I think that was until they found some magical water in Bath. And later, home to Parliament under Richard II. And it was in 1896 when the smallpox epidemic infected 2,000 Gloucester folk that a bright young scientist, Edward Jenner, invented and administered the first ever vaccine in an experiment that would go on to save billions of lives worldwide. So today, as the government stashes up on the smallpox vaccine, a special nod to a Gloucester cow back then called Blossom, and the little boy, James Phipps, who allowed himself to be smeared with pus from the cow's udders. Well, in Chapter 2 of another sad endorsement of the 21st century is the news that marriage rates are at an all-time low. This isn't about bemoaning people not spending a small fortune on a white frock and a cake and forcing their friends halfway across the world to get smashed before tying the knot. No, this is about the shameful demise of an institution that is the very social fabric of a civilised society, endorsing the virtues of commitment and true family values. In today's individualistic, throwaway world with mental health issues galore, we need marriage to be championed and celebrated more than ever before. Now, that irritating do-gooder in America, Nancy Pelosi, is sticking her oar in again over Brexit, claiming there's no hope for a US trade deal if we ditch the Northern Ireland Protocol. What does the Democrat speaker even know about these things, and what's it got to do with her? Thing that has me really confused, though, is the glee with which the usual suspects, the hashtag FBPE trolls, are having a field day about it in a ha-ha, told you so Brexit bashing extravaganza. Remember, the same moronic crowd whipped up a frenzy about chlorinated chicken and the Yanks buying the NHS if we ever did leave Brussels and got an agreement with the United States. And, surprise, surprise, some boffin has come up with a survey that shows the bank of mum and dad will be more used than ever before during the cost of living crisis. Who'd have thunk? It did make me think, though, that one thing we're woefully bad at in Britain is actually sticking together as families. In a lot of other countries and cultures, multi-generational households are the norm, where everyone from granny and grandad to the youngest baby pull together to help one another out. It takes a village to raise a child, they say. Perhaps if we actually warmed up to the idea of clubbing together a bit more, there'd be more housing stock available, a glut of free childcare, and the restoration of some good old-fashioned values. Now, the UK government's independent advisor on tackling violence against women has suggested her calls for street harassment to be made a crime are being blocked, with some papers reporting the plans have been rejected by Boris himself. What is the big fear about making legislation that would stop men publicly abusing women? People get all up in arms about the idea that this means wolf whistling would be banned and white van men the world over would be persecuted, which sounds to me rather like scaremongering bump. Seriously, unless you are a top-grade creep who goes about the place being lewd and intimidating, you should have nothing to worry about, and you should support making sure your wives, girlfriends, sisters and daughters can go about their lives feeling safe. Calvin, a lot of things for you to get your conservative gnashers into there.
Yes. Firstly, this is not a legislation issue. This is a societal issue. We should encourage men to be better men and not to creep women out, not to stare at them on the tube, not to follow them when they get off, all these things. I don't think it's a police issue. I don't know what the police can do about someone being creepy. They've already got enough on their plate and they don't address burglaries and assaults. So I don't know how they're going to manage arresting people who stare at people dodgily. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, no, I mean, look, I think if it comes to public harassment, we're talking more like following someone up the street, repeatedly catcalling. I wouldn't imagine it's a funny look on the tube, and if it was, I'd be the first one to say that's nonsense, because any old character could use it to try and blame someone else for something who's completely innocent.
So where do we draw the line in the legislation? Do we say, OK, if they followed you down the street, and how many streets and how far have they followed you, or what if they're going the same way as you? I don't understand how we define this as a crime. That's where I come into problems with this, because we have too much over-legislation.
Well, I guess we're never going to find out as the legislation's been blocked.
Good.
The marriage thing, I think this would probably chime with you a lot. That, you know, the rates are the lowest they have ever been. And when you speak to people nowadays, you constantly hear, don't you, I don't believe in marriage, I don't believe in monogamy. No. It's sad, isn't it?
It is sad, and I'm going to sound very old-fashioned here, but what is the point of marriage? If people are already having sex willingly with everyone they meet, if people are already living together as if they're already married anyway, what are the benefits of actually getting married? And unless people are religious and see it as a union of man and woman under God, what is the point of it for them? So what we have to do is look at countries like Hungary, Poland, Croatia, the lost elements of Christendom, and see what they're doing to succeed in this area. They're incentivizing the family, and not just marriage, but the family in general. Even France, to some degree, there are certain benefits for having kids, and the more kids you have, the more benefits you get. I think that's the way we encourage society to be more family orientated. Right now, not only are marriage rates declining, but the age at which people get married is rising. For men it's 38, for women it's 35. People want to have a career first before they settle down and start a family. So our focus has shifted from family and community into aspiration in some degrees and ambition. We're putting the self first. We've become a very selfish and individualistic society, and that's going to be our own downfall because there are certain communities that are raising families.
Yeah, aren't we just? Calvin, I couldn't agree more. It's been a delight having you on the programme today. The one and only Calvin Robinson. Do come back. Well, that's all I've got time for. Join me again next week for We Need to Talk About on GB News, same time, same place, 2 o'clock on Monday. Coming up next, though, it's The Briefing with Arlene Foster. Here's the weather.
Alex Deakin with your latest weather updates. It's looking drier and brighter for most tomorrow, but Before we get there, the rest of today promises further heavy showers. Feels pretty cool as well if you're heading out tonight. Low pressure is in control of our weather, sitting way up to the north, but spiralling around it bands of showers. One in particular across parts of Scotland, crossing northern England this evening, providing some fairly heavy downpours, a lot of spray and surface water on the roads. That tends to scoot away. The showers a bit more scattered elsewhere. And it is turning drier through this evening. Most of us from midnight onwards will be dry with clear spells. We'll keep a few showers going in western Scotland. With those clear spells, temperatures will drop down maybe to single figures in a few places, but mostly double digits to start the weekend. A fine bright start then for most on Saturday morning. Quite a bit of sunshine around, certainly early on. Cloud will develop through the day and there will be some showers, certainly across the Highlands of Scotland. A few come the afternoon for Northern Ireland, maybe even the odd one for Wales and Western England. But for most of England and Wales and much of eastern Scotland, it's going to be a dry and a bright day and feeling a bit warmer than today as well. Maybe 20, possibly 21 across the southeast and generally into the high teens for many locations. So as I said, feeling a little warmer during tomorrow. Still a few showers and if anything turning wetter through the evening across western Scotland. Perhaps a bit more rain heading into Northern Ireland as we head into the early hours of Sunday morning too. Sunday, again, a bit of a mishmash. There will be a lot of cloud around, certainly western areas, and it's here where there will at times be some showers, certainly west coast of Wales, northwest England could be a little glum, more showers in the northwest. But again, large parts of the Midlands, eastern and southern England will be dry and fine on Sunday. And with a bit more sunshine, we could see a bit more warmth in the southeast, maybe 24 Celsius. For most places, though, we're again going to be in the high teens at best on Sunday.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle,